Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's program, the Trump-Biden name-calling saga continues. In a playful response to Biden's remark about Trump supporters being garbage, Trump gets behind the wheel of a garbage truck. With less than a week to go before the US election, concerns mount about potential unrest. If Trump doesn't secure a victory, could we be looking at a possible repeat of the January 6th Capitol riot? At this point, every vote counts as the race between Trump and his Democratic rival Harris is neck and neck. And we'll be turning our eye to the situation in the Middle East as Israel launches strikes on Baalbek, the 3,000-year-old UNESCO World Heritage Site, and that's drawing fierce criticism from UNESCO and historians alike. Hello and welcome. Dressed in a high-vis orange vest, the Republican nominee and former President Donald Trump was sat in the passenger seat of a garbage truck in Wisconsin in a campaign stunt, taking a jab at the Democrats over President Joe Biden's comments in which he suggested that Trump supporters are garbage.
How do you like my garbage truck? This truck is in honor of Kamala and Joe Biden. And Joe Biden should be ashamed of himself if he knows what he's even doing. And she should be ashamed because she shouldn't let him do it. She's the vice president, but I assume she's acting as the president. She should never have let that happen.
Donald Trump speaking there while still wearing his bright orange vest. Trump later took the stage at a rally in Wisconsin, defending his supporters once again. 250 million Americans are not garbage, he firmly said.
And I have to begin by saying 250 million Americans are not garbage.
Well, I'd like to introduce now Angie Wong, Republican Executive Committee member in Florida, who joins us from Miami. Angie, great to have you with us. Reading reports about you, newspaper articles in which you're quoted, you're described as being an ardent supporter of President Donald Trump, and I gather you've seen him in the last couple of days. And one of the things you say on X is that you see him as being a changed man. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, no, I've been following President Trump for 4 long years. I was there when he announced for his presidency back in November 2022. And it's been a long journey. The man has not had a single day off since he's announced. He's been go, go, go. What's wonderful about President Trump is that I saw him in Mar-a-Lago 2 days ago, where he had Gold Star families. These are families who have had family members died in war and overseas. And then the very next day, he's a garbage man, right? Driving around in a garbage truck. So this man can go high, he can go low. His closing argument for this election has just been he's having fun. He's much more relaxed. You can see that in him. He's enjoying it now. Whereas I think when he first started, it was really literally fight, 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 because he felt scorned after the 2020 election for, well, feeling as if he won the election, whereas the electors did not give it to him. So this is the ultimate comeback. You see that he's much more easy now. He's much more relaxed because the polls are all going in his favor.
Are you of the school of thought that he didn't win the 2020 election, or are you of the school of thought that he had it stolen from him?
I am of the thought where I was actually watching the polls, and I did see some anomalies. Now, can I prove that across every single state that he's lost in that did not ultimately give him the election? No, but I have seen enough evidence to show that there was some funny business happening there. This round, the RNC, along with the Trump team, they have been watching the polls very, very closely. And now they're sending their lawyers out to preempt anything that's happening. So, for example, in Pennsylvania, there were supposed poll workers turning people away from the polls when they were standing online to vote. And that you can't do that kind of thing, but they ran to the courts and they did something about it. In Virginia, the governor, Glenn Youngkin, he ran to Supreme Court when the own state allowed for non-citizens to vote. And luckily, the Supreme Court yesterday voted with Glenn Youngkin and said, no, non-citizens cannot vote in American elections. So it's gotten to that point where we're running to the courts to determine who can vote and who can't vote. And we're stopping any sort of nonsense that we had seen in 2020.
Let's turn our eye to what I think we can call now Garbage Gate, the story that won't go away, and the story that was in the headlines originally as a negative Republican headline. It's now sort of been turned on its head a little bit, and you're having a bit of fun with this. You described yourself as, according to Joe Biden, I'm an Asian American deplorable garbage lady. Let's be clear, though, the word garbage didn't originate in the Democrat camp. It came from the Republican camp. It came from a comedian on Sunday at that now infamous rally in New York. It was an ill-advised joke, wasn't it?
Well, talk about spin room. This is spin room at its best. You're absolutely right to catch that. It was a terrible joke spoken at Madison Square Gardens at a Trump rally. And there was a little bit of press about that. But then all of a sudden, Joe Biden took it, spun it around, and gave it back to Donald Trump. This is political tennis, you guys. And Donald Trump took that word that was trending on X, and the next day, you see him driving around in a garbage truck wearing a garbage vest. I was at the early voting sites this morning and watching what was going on there. We saw two men dressed up as garbage men waiting to go in and vote. It is Halloween here in the US. People are dressing up in garbage bags. So you can't, I mean, this is pop culture politics. You couldn't ask for a better campaign message and spinning a negative to a positive and putting it on its head. Donald Trump knows how to do that. He's been in show business all his life. He knew exactly how to spin this message to his favor. And now we're all laughing at it. And the funny thing is, it was Joe Biden who gave this one to him. So you almost have to wonder whether or not President Joe Biden is secretly a MAGA fan.
I mean, there is a certain amount of irony in an election where you want to be highly visible, to wear a high visibility vest as President Trump did. But there is a negative side to this for Donald Trump, because, of course, a state like Pennsylvania, 580,000, we think, could be more residents of Puerto Rican heritage. I mean, there's a huge number of potential lost votes in what is a key battleground state, aren't there?
Well, in Pennsylvania, yes, and in many cities. I mean, we are a country of immigrants, but here's the thing: Puerto Ricans, well, guess what? They're not immigrants. They're Americans, right? They are one of our territories. So it's an ill-advised joke. And I personally, I've attended a lot of these rallies and also the RNC convention. So much of this is scripted. So for that joke to have been said at a Trump rally and, the staffers knew that was coming, that was a very, very, very strange choice. So I don't think that they're going to make that mistake again. But we haven't seen the backlash from Puerto Ricans. I was on the ground with the news crew speaking with the Puerto Rican community. And honestly, they're so excited to vote for Trump, not because of, what we can call racist jokes, but mainly because they care about God, they care about family, they care about eggs being under $1 a piece. I mean, this is what people are voting for right now. It's not about that. It's about bringing back sanity and security back into the United States. Yes, was it an off-color joke? Yes. Has Trump made a few of them? Yes. Has his surrogates made a couple of them? All day long. But it's almost to the point where we care more about making sure that we have a savings for our children and making sure that we have something left over for ourselves to, just enjoy life here in the U.S. We can't do that right now. People are choking. We're buried under a lot of debt and a lot of chaos. So we want all of that to go away come November 5th.
5 days to go, and you're probably looking very closely at the polls in your state and more broadly. Are you seeing the needle shift at all?
Tremendously. So here in the county where I represent, Miami-Dade County, we went from a blue county where Joe Biden won by 8 points to a red county just last week. We are now officially a Republican county. I never thought I would see that in my lifetime. We gained close to 18 points. That means 18 percentages of voters went Republican this round. And we're seeing that not just here in Miami, we're seeing it in Tampa, Florida. We're also seeing the needle move in New York City. I mean, imagine, I'm from New York City and I've ran races in New York City. You would never think New York City would go anywhere near even the pink zone. But now, I'm not going to say it's going to turn pink or red anytime soon. It's still very blue, but we're seeing county by county flipping red. And I think that is going to be, when we do the autopsy of 2024, you're going to see traditional blue cities now go towards the red. And a lot of it has to be because of city safety and also because of the economy. And I think that's something that Democrats will have to look at for the midterm election, because if they don't change the message on that, they'll never win another race again in their own cities.
You're, I think, our first Asian American guest, certainly this week. Tell us a little bit about the voting intentions of people in the demographic of Asian Americans. Is there anything that sets Asian Americans apart in terms of their priorities, perhaps going into the election? What's at the top of their mind as they cast their ballots, or is it largely the same as the rest of the as every other community?
Well, the Asian American community, especially the voters here, I mean, we're big on small businesses, good public schools, letting big government leave. We don't want to be bothered. You know, we want to live our lives and live it peacefully. Unfortunately, there's been so much shenanigans with defunding the police here in the U.S., with the rhetoric of, well, you know, you're not going to get prosecuted if you steal under $1,000 of merchandise in most cities now. You know, and that is affecting the small business owners, which the Asian American community largely is, right? We rely on our public schools. Well, the public schools have become indoctrination camps for the most part. I had 2 children in public schools. I had to pull them out because of the learning and the teaching. And if you're a parent making inquiries about what they're learning, even forgetting any of the nonsense of politics, but just asking about curriculum, you are then told to go stand in the back of the line. You're not supposed to ask these questions. So all of this is compounding. It's been over 4 years that parents have been sidelined, that small business owners are barely making it in this country. So I think that is driving people who are first-time voters to register to vote and vote for the first time in their lives. And Asian Americans especially, having worked in Asia, they don't want to commit their name, their address, and party affiliation to any piece of paper or voter roll because of generally, you know, what their families would used to say. If you're coming from perhaps communist Vietnam or China or anywhere where you put a political affiliation out there, they can come after you and your family. So that you have that legacy of not trusting the voting process. But now they don't care because their own livelihoods, their own savings, and their children are at stake. So they're coming out in large numbers to vote. And I'm seeing it everywhere across all coalitions, not just Asian Americans, Blacks, Latinos especially. The Democrats have pretty much lost Latinos for another generation or two because they're not going to go, they're escaping socialism themselves if they're from Cuba or Venezuela. So that's what we're seeing. And I think that is the ultimate red wave when we go back and we re-examine this election, is that you're going to see Latinos and Asians and certainly Black men going Republican.
What is it about, for example, on the issue of education? Because I don't think we've talked very much about education either during the course of the last week. Top concerns we're being told about are the economy, immigration, reproductive rights. Education hasn't actually been under the microscope yet. So I'd like to just ask you a little bit more about that. What is it hoped by people you're talking to who say they're going to cast their ballot for Donald Trump? What is it about his credentials on the subject of education that makes him the more appealing candidate?
Right. For the American student to be competitive in the future, in the near future, when they're adults, we need to be teaching things like space, engineering, maths, even media literacy, things, and personal finance, for example. These are real hardcore skills and tools that you need to be the next generation of adults. We're not doing that. You know, schools right now are inundated with something we call the DEI initiatives, which is more the diversity, the equity, the inclusion, all the kind of soft feel-good stuff for including everybody. And we're talking about race and gender and all that stuff. That's become the top priority of a lot of our schools. Unfortunately, that's coming from our teaching colleges. These are incentives given by the federal government bleeding into the schools. So if you're a school applying for a grant or some sort of school funding, you have to oblige by gender studies, race equity studies, all this stuff. That is all fine and well, and there's a place for that. But we're forgetting that our students are not ranking on the top of the list in a world ranking anymore. We're not producing grade A students anymore. And that is going to hurt us in the future. So I think for President Trump, he's got an eye on education. He wants to bring the schools back to the state. The same way he talks about abortion, it's a state issue. He wants education to be a state issue, and he wants the funding not to be from the federal government, but from the states. And then the reason why that matters is because then each state has its own jurisdiction over what it can teach, where the money's allocated. And I think that's probably a better resource because we're seeing a lot of things being misallocated in school fundings towards social agendas versus actual teaching our students.
Okay, so that's education. Another issue I'd like to ask you a little bit more about is foreign policy. And again, if you've got anything you can add with respects to how Asian Americans view foreign policy in the context of this election, that would be really interesting as well, because obviously Donald Trump claims to be very tough on China. He says he was very tough on China during his his previous term in office. Is that something you think Asian Americans want to see more of? And I'd also like to ask you whether events in the Middle East have had any impact on voter intentions there amongst people around you.
No, absolutely. I'll take these two as two separate questions. Certainly, look, Donald Trump has been very, very loud at calling out the Chinese and wanting to put additional tariffs on Chinese-made goods. A lot of it is political. I can tell you already in Washington, D.C., there are a lot of Chinese companies or U.S. companies that do business in China and rely on Chinese products. They're already hiring lobbyists to take care of a problem because they know Donald Trump is likely going to win the election, and they are scared that tariffs are going to jump from 10% to 100% overnight when he takes office. And these are real concerns. So I think that whoever the Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of Treasury, and also the Secretary of State will be, they're going to have a Chinese problem because of a lot of the rhetoric that has been coming out already from the campaign of Donald Trump. So that has to get worked out because there are some realities. Yes, the Chinese and other foreign manufacturers, they're going to be taxed heavily. Now, what is that balance? Because right now, the U.S. is not manufacturing everything it needs for Americans to survive. And they're not going to be paying, for example, $17 for a trash bag for it to be manufactured here in the U.S., right? So there's got to be some realities and something that balances what we can do and what we can't do. And I hope that we have some smart cabinet secretaries who is going to understand that and know how to deal with that, because it is going to be a problem given all the hyper rhetoric about Chinese-made goods. In regards to the Middle East, for sure, the Middle East and the Gaza conflict has created a lot of divide in this election. I was at Columbia University when the riots broke out. Clearly, what we're seeing is this is going to be a major voting bloc and also a problem for Kamala Harris. Donald Trump has taken a position on the Middle East. He is pro-Israel. Kamala Harris is trying to have it both ways. She wants her Jewish voters and she wants her Arab American voters as well. Unfortunately, it's very difficult here in the U.S. to gain both and keep both happy. But she's tried to flip-flop multiple times to please both parties. Remember, Arab Americans here in the U.S., there are major voting blocks in Michigan and in Minnesota and in our cities. And she needs to make sure that she gets that vote, because without that vote, a large percentage of Democrat votes come from her base there. And I don't know whether or not they're for her, for multiple reasons, but mainly because she has not taken a strong position on Palestine, on the Gaza conflict, and whether or not she's going to give additional funding to Israel.
There's a lot of name calling during this election campaign. We hear Donald Trump calling Kamala Harris and Joe Biden all sorts of things. The last couple of weeks, we've heard quite extreme rhetoric used by the other side as well. The words like Nazi and fascist being bandied around. Is that something you've ever seen before? And what do you say to people like General John Kelly, Donald Trump's former chief of staff, referring to him as someone who has authoritarian tendencies?
Yeah, I never thought in the last week of the election that I would be defending Donald Trump from being called Hitler. I never thought in the last week of the election I would be defending half of Americans from being called garbage. Words do matter here in the U.S., and I think in particular, when you are labeling someone, a candidate, as Hitler, as Nazis, it gives permission to a certain group of people to then create and incite violence because it's justifiable. And I think, unfortunately, that is what General Kelly was trying to do. And that is dangerous words, because he knows that these words are weapons, and it may even be a preemptive or a preview of what's to come after the election. We have long said that even if Donald Trump wins on November 5th, whether or not he makes it to the White House on January 20th, 2025 is a whole other question. There's a lot of booby traps that have already been set up for Donald Trump after the election, because in anticipation of a win next Tuesday. One being, the understanding of labeling him as a criminal, a federally charged felon, for example, which he was charged with in a Manhattan court, calling him Hitler. Those things they actually do have constitutional and legal ramifications. He may not be allowed, for example, to be sworn in because of some of these booby traps I'm talking about. And remember, right after the election on November 28th, Donald Trump gets sentenced in a Manhattan court for for his convictions in a fraud case in New York that was well covered earlier this year. Now, if that sentencing goes the same way the Trump organization's CFO went, and the Trump CFO, I believe, got 3 to 5 years in jail. Well, Trump has over 30 counts that he was found guilty for. Will the Supreme Court now step in and say, this is ridiculous? He has been elected president by the American people. He cannot rule from a jail cell. I don't know. These are all big constitutional questions. And I think that's the real fight that we have to prep for, because 5 days from now, likely Donald Trump will be our next president, but what happens thereafter?
Sure.
And that's where war is going to begin. I think that's when it's going to get very interesting.
Yeah, there's just one last thing I wanted to ask you about, and thanks for raising all those points. You're the founder of something called Operation Bully Proof, and just to read your mission statement: to combat online abuse and harassment by exposing those who misuse digital platforms to spread fake news, information, and harm others. Are we seeing an upswing, an upturn in online abuse in the run-up to this election, or is it perhaps no different from 2020?
Well, I think the abuse has heightened for sure. Look, this election has been about the man versus the machine, Donald Trump versus the DNC machine. Over and over again, you see him fighting the media and fighting media misinformation. Remember, when he was holding a Trump rally just last Sunday, one of our news networks here ran side-by-side images of when there was a Nazi rally in the same stadium 90 years ago. So, they're really pushing it when it comes to misinformation and when it comes to harassment. Operation Bully Proof is an organization I had started with Melinda Ciccarelli from New Jersey, whose husband's running for governor there. We are not seeing the protection for adults and children because we believe in something called free speech here. And sometimes free speech is taken a little too far. It goes beyond hate speech. It actually goes to endanger people. And right now, our laws and our lawmakers are not protecting average Americans from anything being said about them online. And there has to be a line, right? Especially when it enters criminality. And what we're seeing over and over again is if a crime is committed offline in the real world, you would be arrested. If it's committed online, you wouldn't be arrested for the same exact crime. So that is where we have to kind of re-examine where we are as a society. We believe in free speech, but when crimes are actually committed, when harm is being fed, when misinformation is causing you and I to vote a certain way or buy a certain product or behave a certain way, we have to examine if this is a good thing for us going forward. So that's what Operation Bullyproof is about. It's to, one, find the stalkers and the cyber stalkers in the world, but two, really to almost lobby for a safer internet so that we can just have an open forum and have discussions without not only being attacked, but, you know, without someone coming after your entire family. And we've seen that time and time again. So we need some protections there for everybody.
Okay. All right. We're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time, but really appreciate you speaking to us. Angie Wong, a Republican Executive Committee member in Florida. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you again.
So 5 days left to go until the election. And let's take a look at what the polls have to say at this stage. Well, the 2024 US election is shaping up to be one of the closest races in living memory, with Harris leading by just 1%, according to the latest polls from YouGov. 47% of voters support her, compared to 46% supporting Donald Trump. Well, Kamala Harris may be gaining a slight lead in the elections, but concerns about her policies in Gaza persist among some Americans. At a rally, protesters heckled her, labeling the vice president a war criminal in response to her stance.
We understand the opportunity we have before us to turn the page on the fear
Meanwhile, Donald Trump has vowed that if he wins the election, he will bolster the US economy and protect American jobs, mainly by applying tariffs as high as 60% on goods from China. But whatever the result, the former President Barack Obama has been speaking, and he's been reminding people that Donald Trump, he says, inherited his economy, suggesting that Trump cannot claim full credit.
And the reason some people think, well, I don't know, I remember that economy when he first came in being pretty good. Yeah, it was pretty good, because it was my economy.
Now, both Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have shown strong support for Israel. Well, as a future potential president, Harris's views on the ongoing war in Gaza are a point of concern. Will she adopt a different policy from Biden, who has pledged unconditional US aid and support for Israel? Well, to discuss this, we're joined by Susan Platt, former Chief of Staff to President Joe Biden. Thank you so much for being with us, Susan. I just want to ask you, first of all, we saw Kamala Harris on the stage in Raleigh, North Carolina yesterday. She was interrupted by a heckler who shouted, "Kamala Harris, you have disrespected the Palestinian community." The same thing happened in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. How do you think she handled it?
I think she handled it just fine. It's clearly a very challenging situation for all involved and a very sad situation. But right now, she's not the president. She has to get her message out, and we have an election in 5 days. She's made it very clear that what is happening there right now is just a tragedy all the way around. But, you know, let's just see what happens. We're doing the best we can to juggle what we need to do, and let's see what happens in 5 days.
Indeed, and it's not the first time this has happened. People have heckled at Kamala Harris before, shouting words to the effect of, "You're a war criminal." Clearly, the impact of a situation 10,000 kilometers away is very real there in the United States. And I just wanted to get your opinion. Do you think it could shift the needle and push voters in one way or the other, Susan?
Well, obviously, people have very strong feelings on both sides of this, but in the whole scheme of things, it may make a little bit of a difference here or there. But the bigger picture is no, I don't believe it will make a bigger difference in the final results of the election, whether it be in states where really there's more of the population, like in Michigan, or in any other state across the country.
Do you get the impression that, for example, Arab Americans who are clearly very angered by what's happening in the Middle East these last 12 months or more, in fact, are more inclined to vote for Donald Trump, for a different approach, or perhaps for a third party, something completely different? What are they saying in the polls and in the media?
Honestly, what I believe is that either they won't vote. I cannot imagine them necessarily voting for Donald Trump. Donald Trump says, we just sit down and work it out. I don't know how that's not an answer to the problem. So I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. Maybe, a few votes here and there. Obviously, people care. It's horrible. It's a horrible situation, but it's not easily solved. We know that. And I do think that the bulk of Americans are looking to not only turn the page, but change the chapter of where we are right now and move forward in 2025. So we'll see what happens.
Indeed. Well, changing the chapter for a lot of people would mean not voting for a continuation of President Biden's policy in the Middle East, which is, as far as we know, roughly what Vice President Kamala Harris has in store, isn't it?
Look, it's an important topic, but there are other things that Americans care about. There's other things that American women particularly care about. When you have Donald Trump telling them he's going to protect them, whether they want it or not, I think they've already made a decision on a lot of American women on they don't want that kind of protection. They want their rights back. They don't want them taken away. I think people have made a decision. Even his former vice president, Mike Pence, is not voting for him. So I think we're looking to do more than just turn the page. We're looking to change the chapter.
Just going back to heckling, and we saw, as I said, Kamala Harris being heckled on two separate occasions just yesterday. How damaging is it for a candidate to be heckled? Does it do anything to affect their brand or how they're perceived by their support base?
Well, it's part of our system. It's part of living in a democracy. They have every right to say their opinion. They have every right to say it loudly if they'd like. They just can't go and commit violence. So do I think it throws her off maybe for a second or two? But no, it doesn't affect most politicians. They understand that people have different opinions, and we're a democracy, and we work it out in our way at the ballot box.
Is there a big difference in how Kamala Harris handles a heckler to how Donald Trump handles a heckler?
Well, Donald Trump tells them to throw them out and lock them up. And I'm not sure that that's an answer. That's part of our democracy, being able to say your opinion on things. Kamala Harris usually will say, hey, I get you have a different opinion. Go ahead and vote differently. And that's the way we do it here in the United States.
Obviously, no particular cause for concern about those incidents yesterday with regards to security, but it has been a tense campaign. And there must be a lot of people who are worried about the spectre of violence looming large over this entire election campaign. And we're not there yet. There's still another few days to go. Is that something that you're concerned about?
Well, it's always a concern living in a free country. But I will tell you, I was there on the ellipse in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday night for her speech, where nearly 75,000 people were there, gathered peacefully, collectively, joyfully. And I think that's what we need to get back to as a country. We need to turn our heads away from fear, denigration. I mean, Donald Trump will say to Americans that we're the trash can of the world. I don't think most Americans believe that. And I think it's time to turn the page. But I will tell you, when you have 75,000 people gathered in one spot, as peaceful as that was, I think we all want to continue in a peaceful way.
You just used the word trash can, which makes me think of the garbage gate, which has been quite a dominant headline in the last 4 or 5 days. Obviously, that was a comment about Puerto Rico being a floating island of garbage that originated in the Republican camp. But it hasn't been done, in the end, it hasn't done any favors to the Democrats either, because President Biden has spoken on the issue and really poured petrol on the flames. Do you think Joe Biden, for whom you used to work, has become more of a liability than an asset to the Harris campaign team?
No, I think we all know what Joe Biden said. It's a kerfuffle about nothing, about an apostrophe. And that kind of rhetoric comes from the MAGA crowd all the time. Kamala Harris said, first of all, she's on the ballot, not Donald Trump. And number two, she denounces any kind of discrimination like that. Donald Trump will go out. I think it's hysterical how the media really has focused on this. When Donald Trump has called her low IQ, lying people here and there, trash can of the world, it's hypocrisy at its best.
But there was a lesson to be learned, wasn't there? I mean, it didn't come from a president at the time, but it came from a former First Lady back in 2016 when Hillary Clinton called Donald Trump's supporters a basket of deplorables. I mean, it's ill-advised, isn't it, to write off tens of millions of Americans who
He didn't
just
do
don't
that.
support you.
Who did that was Donald Trump and the MAGA crowd. Joe Biden said what he meant is the comedian who spoke at the Madison Square Gardens. So, if the media wants to make a big stink about it, that's fine. That's your choice. But we all know Joe Biden. We all know he doesn't feel that way. But we also know that the comedian who said those words was at Donald Trump's rally in Madison Square Gardens.
With regards to foreign policy, which is where we were talking about just a moment ago, in terms of, obviously, Middle East policy, that's one big issue. What would you say are the other big foreign policy issues at the forefront of voters' minds there in the US?
Well, obviously, the war in Ukraine is another issue, and the threat to the EU by Vladimir Putin and others. We're at a turning point in some parts of the world, of course, and yours as well. We'll just have to work together collectively the best we can to try to solve all of our problems in talking together and being together. And Kamala Harris has stressed she wants to be a president for everyone, that everyone can come talk and express their views as opposed to resorting to violence or horrible rhetoric. I think that's what we have to look at. This is who we are as Americans. We are not demons, like Donald Trump likes to say. And I feel bad. Those folks that support him, I understand. They feel slighted, they feel left out, they feel angry. But we have to work towards a better place, a better country, a better democracy where everyone has a voice and everyone gets to be heard and everyone has an equal opportunity. And that's what we feel that should happen across the globe.
The economy, of course, is the top issue on voters' minds, according to polls, and in particular, this issue of the cost of living crisis in the United States. What's Kamala Harris promising, and what do you think she can realistically do or offer in terms of addressing this issue of the cost of living crisis?
Well, she's talking about an opportunity economy where we can give people some breaks, first-time home buyers, going after the cheats who try to take advantage of bad situations and the corporate greed. That's the kind of thing she's talking about. Unlike Donald Trump, who wants to give corporations tax cuts, Kamala Harris wants to give tax cuts to the American people.
And do you think people need to hear more of that? We've got, 5 days left of campaigning. I mean, how would you advise, what messages would you advise the Harris campaign team to really hit home on during these remaining days?
I think her message right now is right on point. She called Donald Trump a petty tyrant who appears unstable and unhinged, looking to put people in jail, while she shows up in the White House, should she be elected, with a to-do list for the American people, where she's going to stand up for women and their rights, not take rights away from people. She's going to work on the opportunity economy to make things better for everyone's lives. And I think that's what we talk about. We talk about optimism and joy, not discrimination, retribution, and fear. She's right on point.
And obviously these swing states, the 7 of them, are going to be very much the focus for both candidates. I just want to get your opinion. I mean, having watched probably several elections very closely over the years, Susan, do you think it's possible to overdo it in a swing state and people are just going to get totally saturated and fatigued by the entire exercise?
Well, some probably will, and those people more often than not, we're not going to really vote anyway. It's important, and that's why the race is tight. We know that. It's going to come down to a few states. We know that. But I will tell you, I would much rather be Kamala Harris's team, where she has invested so much money and people power on the ground, targeting voters, getting them out to vote. Donald Trump has kind of ignored that, and Kamala Harris continues to reach out to everyone across the country, saying, come on board, where Donald Trump is continuing to just push people away and demonize folks. And I don't think that's a message that America wants to have.
We're, 5 days away from voting day, and we probably won't have, well, we're being told we probably won't have a result by even the 6th of November. I don't know what you think about that, but I just want to ask you, looking beyond that, let's imagine the scenario in which the Democrats don't come out on top. What will happen to the party then? I mean, what sort of direction do you see the party going in the event of a loss to Donald Trump?
Well, I think we have to see what happens in our Congress. Do the Democrats take the House, or do the Republicans maintain their majority? Do the Republicans take the Senate, or do we Democrats maintain our majority? I think that's what we have to look at, because, you know, with divided government, it all depends on how everyone can collectively work towards a better future, just like we had this past year on working towards border security. Donald Trump told them to dump it, and it was a deal that was worked out between Democrats and Republicans, a deal that all the border security folks wanted. I think that's what you have to look at. You have the White House and you have both houses of Congress. Will they work collectively together for the American people, or will they continue down this path of taking away rights of folks, demonizing people, and threatening to lock folks up?
And you're presumably keeping a very close eye on the polls, Susan, like many of us. Just tell us, what's your hunch as to where you see things heading and how the polls have evolved during the course of the last couple of days?
Well, I think right now the polls really can't tell you a whole lot. There's movement, but it's all just on the margins. And it's going to come down to, I don't look at polls anymore. It's just forget it at this point. It's all get out the vote operation. And Kamala Harris has one heck of an operation. Donald Trump really hasn't invested, short of Elon Musk, who's in court today about his lottery scheme. They really haven't invested a lot on the ground. So I would much rather be Kamala Harris. Usually that's good for maybe 2 points. And in an election like this, where you have 7 states that are really close, 2 points can matter a whole lot.
Okay, they certainly could. Well, we'll have to wait and see, as you say, a very tight election and everything to play for in these remaining days of the campaign. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Susan Platt, thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Well, voters there in the US are concerned not only about election results, but also about potential violence if former President Donald Trump loses. Well, according to a recent poll of 5,000 registered voters in 10 swing states, including North Carolina and Pennsylvania, 57% of respondents are very or somewhat worried that Trump supporters could resort to violence. And they're fearing a repeat of the January 6th Capitol riots. Let's take a closer look at what happened then. So is there a possibility of another event similar to the 6th of January 2021 Capitol riot if Donald Trump loses? How might his supporters react? Well, Well, joining us to discuss this is Jamie Roberts, the award-winning director of 4 Hours at the Capitol. That's a documentary on the events that unfolded that day. Jamie, it's great to have you with us. I should point out that that documentary was nominated for 2 BAFTAs, 1 Emmy, and I'd just like to read a little section of a review of that film on IMDb. It said, "Every single American citizen should watch this unfiltered film of the violent protests." Tell us, Jamie, how real is the threat of a repeat of what happened on the 6th of January, in your opinion?
Very real. I think after the previous insurrection, obviously a lot of people were arrested from the likes of the Proud Boys, these kind of grassroots street movements that were mobilized that undertook the attack on the Capitol. The US government came down very hard on them, but they still exist. They're fragmented. They're all over America. But also it goes wider than that. There's kind of support within, I suppose, more mainstream society. And if people think that the election is wrongly won by the Democrats, or they're not happy with it, and so we saw before Donald Trump and his kind of acolytes like Rudy Giuliani, they make no mind to do whatever they can to get what they want, which is to get back into power, and they'll mobilize people. And there was violence before, and I could see them doing it again. They don't seem to have toned down the rhetoric. If anything, it seems to be amping up. We haven't seen much violence like we did last time in the lead up to the election, but really it's all about if Trump loses or if something happens that upsets people, how then they might be incited to do something. But yeah, I mean, the temperature is extremely high in America, as it has been here, but over there it's very high. So the threat of violence, I think over there, from what I saw with lots of different groups across America, it can be a tinderbox, and it is right now with the kind of the state of the conversations about immigration, the personality politics that's involved on both sides. It's kind of the debate seems to have moved away from politics more into a kind of punchy Judy match, and people watching that can really get caught up in it. And as we saw on January 6th in 2021, that can embolden them to riot, to violence. And I think 6 people died within 36 hours then. It was a miracle it wasn't more.
Yeah, I mean, just to think that in a week from now, so long after the 5th of November, we still might not have a result. And given this level of tension and the possible uncertainty, as you say, an unprecedented election on so many levels, I just want to ask you, without sort of spoiling the ending of your film for people who haven't seen it, what did you conclude when you made 4 Hours at the Capitol about who was to blame for what happened that day?
I mean, it's been a little while since I've actually watched the film, but I think this shoots through it that really the person I blame is Donald Trump and the people around him. I mean, he surfed in on a wave of it was other people that put these opportunity in front of him, but he wanted to take power back by hook or by crook, and he thought that Mike Pence was going to help him do that, and they thought they could illegally overturn an election. And then when that didn't happen, he incited his supporters. And I mean, I come to this film impartially. I don't live in America. I don't vote in America. But I met hundreds of people from the Republican Party, from the Democratic Party, hundreds of Trump supporters that we interviewed for hours and hours for this film. And when you put the jigsaw together, it's clear, you know, Rudy Giuliani in the morning was calling for people for trial by combat. The language was violent, and Donald Trump told everyone to go down to the Capitol, and they were whipped up into a fervor. His plan was to get Mike Pence not to certify the votes, and when Mike Pence decided not to do that, which was the legal and right thing, then all hell broke loose. And if it wasn't for some of the people that managed to barricade the doors in the U.S. Senate, then people could have been killed. Sorry, in Congress, then people could have killed. The rioters actually got into the Senate, as we saw with the Q Shaman, and there was a confrontation with a police officer there. It was really close to being much worse. But obviously, there was Ashley Babbitt, was a woman that was shot in there, and they all just seem to be kind of political capital, really, that has been used, and people that have been forgotten. And a lot of people got extremely long prison sentences, but as I say, there's still these kind of grassroots movements that are forming and talking online now that that really they support Trump, and if he doesn't get in, you do wonder if Trump's going to do the same thing again.
But when you look at the sort of the source of the anger that generated, that brought all those people out to the Capitol on the 6th of January, I mean, did you understand as you were making the film? Did you get a sense of where some of that anger was coming from? Was it genuine anger at genuine issues, or do you feel like people have been whipped up in some sort of a frenzy?
I think that whenever there's anger like that, it comes from a very real place. It might be misdirected, but where it's coming from is real. And America is a huge country that is incredibly diverse in terms of rich and poor and different cultures and ethnicities. And somehow the government, the president has to kind of unite all those people. And really that's an impossible task. And as international kind of pressures and tensions within America rise, so there are conflict points. And I think that someone like Donald Trump or politicians will try and find very simple headline points to be able to explain why these are happening and why they can fix it. So, for example, immigration, Mexicans, LGBT issues, so the anger where it's coming from is real. People have got problems with healthcare, with schools, with education. Literacy levels in America are extremely low, much lower than you would think in the most powerful country in the world. So, but those frustrations can be directed somewhere, and Donald Trump is a very good weather vane to be able to do that, and blame certain people and parts of society and claim that he can fix it. And often the subjects that the areas that he works with are hot button topics that get people very angry very quickly. And
so do you think it's fair? Sorry to interrupt. Do you think it's fair to just boil it down to one word, the word inequality? Would you say that was, really the buzzword, or would you have a better word for it?
If it was one word, what that Donald Trump is looking to exploit to win, or what's
what brought people out onto the streets in such large numbers, and what made them so angry? I mean, you were talking there about education. A lot of people have been telling us about the cost of living crisis there in the United States, and it's only got worse in the last few years. Would you say inequality was a sort of a key factor, a common denominator?
It's a key factor, but I think there's within that group, you could see it on January the 6th, within the group, there's quite a lot of different issues that people have got, but they unite under this umbrella of Trump. So I don't think it's necessarily just one thing, but it can be public services, kind of boring things that people don't really want to get into, but that do matter. So that if you get ill in America, it can be very hard to get healthcare if you haven't got insurance, or you can't. It's getting more and more expensive to have a family. And then, inequality that's a big one, especially in terms of kind of rural and middle America. So, for example, I did quite a lot of filming down in places like New Mexico, which the only person that visited there from the US government, kind of major figure, had been Trump, and they'd had kind of quite a lot of economic downturn in that area. And so the people around there, they looked at him and thought, well, this is the only guy that turned up. He seems to be talking some sense because nobody else is, so he's the only option. And I think there was quite a lot of the country that he courted that connected with him for that reason, because the Biden campaign at the time, it seemed to really be on the East Coast and the West Coast. The rest of America seemed to be slightly forgotten, which we had Brexit in the UK. It's a similar thing where you have a bit of a tale of two countries happening.
I just want to ask you, are you gearing up for a new film that's going to be about the 6th of January 2025? Is that something you've got in your mind?
I'm watching it very closely. I mean, if Donald Trump came in, I would love to do an observational film as a fly on the wall in his presidency. I think at the moment, when we did January the 6th, I was following several different stories which the people that were involved ended up having to break into the Capitol building. So we started immediately on that day. I think with this, I'll watch the situation, and I have been talking to people in some of the movements over there, but I'm not sure. It feels very uncertain as to what's going to happen and which way it's going to go. And I don't think there'll be a replica of what happened last time. I think in a way it could be slightly nothing happens, and then there's a huge surprise, which is usually, I suppose, the way that these things go. They kind of come out of nowhere in some senses.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about an election that's been, and the whole campaign's been so unprecedented on so many levels. We've had these assassination attempts on Donald Trump. There's been ballot boxes set on fire today, well, yesterday rather, in 2 places. And then just yesterday, the man who attacked Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, who at the time was 82 years old, was sentenced to 30 years in prison, in a federal prison. I mean, we're really looking, aren't we, at uncharted territory for the United States, or perhaps it's the new reality of politics in the United States. What's your thinking?
Yeah, I think it's really sad because the US likes to remind the world that it's the kind of center of democracy, but it seems that their democracy is under attack from within. I mean, Pelosi's husband, yeah, he was attacked with a hammer just because he was married to Nancy Pelosi, who obviously works in the US Congress. It's a febrile time where the mainstream is starting to talking like extremists. You know, some of the language that used is the kind of language that the exponents of terrorism use. You know, they're inciting people to violence for political means, and this is just a very dangerous time to be doing that. I know within some of the fringes of the Republican Party, you have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who comes out with some absolutely outrageous things, but no one seems to call it to account or fact check. And we heard just the other day with some of the remarks that were made at the Trump campaign rally, which was offending Latino community, but that's just been brushed off, and it's just kind of huge swathes of America get offended by this, and that obviously angers people and puts them against each other, and then this kind of extremist view of a civil war starts to slightly crystallize in people's minds, which we saw on January the 6th.
Yeah, sure. And Jimmy, sorry, we're coming to the end of the interview, but just one thing that stood out for me, a comment in the last few hours from the French Foreign Minister, Jean-Noël Barrot, who said, quote, "This is an extremely important election. I hope it can take place under peaceful conditions." I mean, we're used to hearing foreign leaders say that about certain countries' elections, and you know, we all know why. But the United States, that's a first for me. And I just wondered, you know, the US election, if they can't get it right without it turning to violence, it sends out a message to the whole of the rest of the world, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think actually 2021, with the accusations of ballot rigging, and then the people, there were people that were working in the voting centres that were then pursued, some attacked, stalked. You know, this happened then, and it looks like it's happening again, where people think they can influence an election by violence or coercion or intimidation, and that's anti-democratic. That's not what this is meant to be about. And so that's the whole point. This kind of idea that you can just overturn an election or control it by your whims rather than the votes of the people is anti-American, anti-democratic, and it is very worrying, because I suppose I was thinking earlier today just about Donald Trump's obviously got huge respect for Vladimir Putin. And I think that he likes that style of democracy where it's not really democracy. You can go on for as long as you want and you have total power. Whereas the reality is you're meant to have 4 years. You're there to serve the people, and then you either get re-elected or you leave. He doesn't seem to want to play by those rules, but his supporters don't seem to care.
OK, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Jamie Roberts, award-winning film director. Thank you very much indeed.
Cheers.
Known as the City of the Sun and named after the Phoenician god Baal, we're talking now about Baalbek in Lebanon, which is home to the largest Roman temple ever built. Well, for more than 3,000 years, the echoes of music have filled this ancient site, especially during the Baalbek International Festival, which has featured over the years legendary artists like Nina Simone. But today, those melodies are drowned out by the sound of bombs. Well, despite its distance from the southern border, Baalbek finds itself at the heart of Israel's military operation, sparking fears for the future of the city and its UNESCO World Heritage Site, which face possible damage or even destruction. Well, with the ongoing Israel-Hezbollah war, Lebanon's historical monuments and UNESCO World Heritage Sites are at risk, according to the country's cultural ministry. Well, joining us to discuss all the latest developments in Lebanon is Michel, Helou, Secretary General of the Lebanese political party, the National Bloc. Thank you so much for being with us, Michel. Before we talk about the situation in Baalbek in particular, I'd just like to talk about the latest you're hearing with regards to possible ceasefire talks. The Israeli Prime Minister is currently hosting the US envoy Amos Hochstein. Are you confident that a ceasefire deal could be on the cards and soon?
So thanks for having me. I believe that, the proposition seems serious. It seems more serious than the former proposition that was talked about a couple of days ago. It seems that, the draft was circulated, it was leaked. It's been worked on in the details. However, I think no one is really confident that this could happen very soon because it's quite preliminary. Because also the demands are quite let's say radical. Let's say that the bar has been put quite high, and there hasn't been, as to what I know, there hasn't been serious discussions, or at least we haven't heard from any of the parties serious reactions to this ceasefire proposal. So I think it's still preliminary. It will play, in the end, on the ability for the two sides to make concessions, and those two sides are mainly Israel and Hezbollah and Iran through Hezbollah on the other side. And I believe that what is really important here is that the Lebanese state rejects any sort of infringement or violation of its sovereignty. And in the proposal that was shared yesterday night, that was leaked yesterday night, there are some important things, among which the withdrawal of the Israeli forces, among which the total application of the international resolutions, and the fact that the state and the Lebanese military should be the only active military force in the country with the UN Blue Helmets. However, there are some other things that are, I believe, unacceptable, such as the fact that the proposal allows the Israelis to take action by air or by land, in the way they want, should they believe that the Lebanese army is not playing its role. And I think this is way too risky. This is a proper infringement and violation of our sovereignty.
I just want to ask you, Michel, we heard for the first time yesterday from the new head of Hezbollah, Naim Qassem, and I'm just wondering if anything stood out for you in his address that indicated that perhaps Hezbollah's got a new approach, or anything that gave you any sort of sense of optimism that we might be moving forward.
No optimism at all. I think it's mostly Hezbollah sticking to their position. Naim Qassem trying to be at the level of his predecessor, Hassan Nasrallah. And the reality is, I think, that his speech was seen as mostly, I think most people were disappointed by his speech. However, he's sticking to his position. We need to fight on. We need to keep going. He tried to defend Iran and Iran's role because, as you might know, a lot of Lebanese people are very critical towards Iran's role, even from Hezbollah's base, because they believe that Iran is basically using Lebanon as one of its battlefields. And then he pushed, to keep fighting, keep going, tried to defend the military results of Hezbollah, saying that although they had gotten very hard hits in the first days, now they are gaining back traction and they are resisting in a solid way against the Israeli aggression. So there's nothing really that shows a change. Specifically, that he said that he would not accept any sort of ceasefire, unless it entails a total withdrawal of the Israelis. So it seems like he's not willing to negotiate much, as to what we've seen, at least publicly yesterday.
I mean, this conflict's been tragic for Lebanon on so many levels. More than 2,000 people have been killed. More than 1 million people have been internally displaced. And now we're hearing that the ancient site of Baalbek, where there are temples thousands of years old, are almost in the direct firing line. What's your understanding about why Israel is targeting this particular region surrounding Baalbek?
No one really understands exactly what are the Israeli intentions. And this is a cause of much debate in Lebanon and outside of Lebanon. What we know is that Israel has been targeting Hezbollah. Hezbollah targets massively, military targets, but also all institutions of Hezbollah, including some civilian institutions of Hezbollah. But more than that, Israel has been targeting in a very large and systematic way nearly everything it can target in the regions where Hezbollah is present, which means that it's targeting in a larger scale the Shia community at large and all what we call Hezbollah's environment. And I think that the way it has been done and the extent of that has led to many possible war crimes, and we're seeing that every day. They are systematically destroying, blowing up buildings and destroying entire villages in the south, and most probably to try and create some sort of an empty buffer zone. We're talking about dozens of villages that have already been blown up. We're talking about entire rural areas and agricultural areas that have been burnt with white phosphorus. And we're talking about evacuation orders that actually look much more like forced displacement orders that have affected hundreds of thousands of people, maybe even more. In the south, we're talking about more than 150 towns that have been forced to evacuate. Nabatieh, and Sur, the two biggest cities in the south, both of them have more than 100,000 people in terms of population. Both of them have been, have seen their population forcibly displaced by bombings and with evacuation orders. And Nabatieh has been bombed in a very, very large way. Same thing is happening in Baalbek, in the Baalbek area. And very recently, they've issued an evacuation order to the entire Baalbek city, as well as other surrounding villages. This is unseen before. I believe many of those actions will be considered as war crimes, and I believe it's totally unacceptable. Obviously, it also, and a lot of people have been talking about that, it also entails the risk on ancient monuments. We have the ruins in Tyre, in Sur, in South Lebanon, where there's a Roman hippodrome that is an exceptional place. We have the largest Roman temple still standing in the world in Baalbek. It has been affected, it has been damaged, an external wall has been damaged by an attack, and it is under risk of being bombed. So all of that is shocking. I believe that what's even more shocking is that we have to wait for Roman ruins to be endangered for the West to wake up to that. And this is something very sad, because we're close to 3,000 people killed by Israeli attacks. A lot of them civilians, probably a majority of them civilians. We've reached also more than 12,000 people injured and 1.3 million displaced people. So definitely the situation is tragic.
And just looking at Baalbek on a map, I mean, we're talking about a site that's 20, 30 kilometers away from the border with Syria. Do you think that's perhaps an indication of a new front, a new direction that the Israeli campaign could be going in? And what do you think the consequences would be if that were the case?
Definitely, I think it's a very smart thing that you're saying here, you're pointing out here. Iran's way of fighting its wars has been, as you know, building a network of militias through its axis, so-called axis of resistance. That means developing this strategic depth between Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, also including Gaza and Yemen as other platforms for them to fight their battles. So what that means is they've been using extensively the land access and the fragility of the borders between those countries, specifically between Lebanon and Iran, in order to channel and transport their weapons, their fighters, and their funding, and many other things. We're also talking about drug cartels that are being used between Syria and Lebanon in order to finance Hezbollah. So clearly, specifically because Hezbollah has set a very strong presence in Syria since the beginning of the Syrian civil war in 2013. Hezbollah is working on both sides of the borders, and they've also been using the Syrian Golan Heights, the occupied Golan Heights by Israel, and this area as also a battlefront. So they're fighting both from Syria and from Lebanon against Israel. So for the Israelis, cutting this access, this route, be it the public official routes, the roads, or the unofficial tunnels that are built across the border, this is something absolutely critical for them in order to cut all access and to basically isolate Hezbollah in Lebanon.
While you're there, just tell us, you're in Beirut, aren't you? What is the situation in the Lebanese capital right now?
Situation is still tense. The situation is still very difficult from a humanitarian perspective. Let's not forget first that there's been hundreds of strikes that have hit Beirut, and specifically its southern suburb, but it's part of Beirut as an agglomeration. So the destruction is massive. And more than that, the Israelis are also preventing ambulances from reaching those areas. So it's very dangerous because not only they've been destroying a lot of civilian buildings on top of Hezbollah infrastructure in southern Beirut, but also they're preventing ambulances, paramedics from reaching those areas. We also have a very difficult humanitarian situation because there's hundreds of thousands of refugees, of internally displaced people that have fled either the southern suburb or South Lebanon to reach other areas of Beirut. So Beirut is in a very complicated situation. And we never know when the Israelis are going to hit again. And that's on top of maybe the sound that you might be able to hear, which is the MK drone that is flying over our heads day in, day out. It's been a month like that, more than a month. Actually, the whole summer was like that. It's been 3-4 months that we have drones surveilling, monitoring, and spying over our heads all the time, at night and in the day.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there's a great deal of fear in Lebanese society right now. And as you say, there's a psychological dimension to this warfare with drones buzzing around overhead. And just let me ask you as well about the humanitarian situation in Lebanon right now. Given that we have that huge number of displaced people, many of them camped out along the Corniche in central Beirut. I mean, are you getting to a stage where supplies are starting to look like they're running low? Because, of course, access in and out of Lebanon is quite severely restricted at the moment, and some planes are still operating. But in terms of shipments of supplies, how do things stand?
From the beginning, the Lebanese state is weak, is extremely weak. We've just been hit by a massive economic and financial crisis. Since 2019, the currency has collapsed by 95%. The state is bankrupt, and many of the institutions are dysfunctional. So starting with that and adding to that 1.3 to 1.4 million displaced, that's more than a quarter of our population. And on top of that, the mass destruction that we've been seeing in the south and in many other areas, southern suburb Beirut, some hospitals cannot function anymore, etc. All of that obviously has overwhelmed completely the capacities of the Lebanese state. Now we have been receiving some amounts of aid from many countries, from France, from the US, from Saudi, from Qatar, from other countries. But definitely the situation is very complicated. Not only, as you said, in terms of the quantity of commodities, of material available to support the displaced people, but also just because most of the displaced have been sheltered in public schools. And those public schools have to open, but they cannot open now. So there's a huge, obstacle, which is how are we going also to send all those kids to school? Not only those who've been displaced, but also those from the regions that are welcoming displaced people. So in total, that's hundreds of thousands of kids that will not be able to go to school this year.
Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Michel, Helou, Secretary General of the Lebanese political party, the National Bloc. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Tom.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.